John out here with you. It is January 25th, 2020. How's everybody doing out there today? Very excited to bring this to you. This is my first PlayStation 5 video review. This is going to be a little bit of a double feature. Spider-Man Remastered and Spider-Man Miles Morales. So we got about 13 minutes here. I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a history lesson. I'm going to give you some gameplay and some of my thoughts on both the games and try to get this into a nice little bow because I have a few other niceties that I want to add to it. So here we go, guys. Spider-Man PlayStation 4 release was September 7, 2018. The PlayStation 5 release, Spider-Man Remastered and Miles Morales, all released on November 12, 2020. If you have the Ultimate Edition, you can get Spider-Man Remastered and Miles Morales. Spider-Man PS4 has sold over 20 million copies. Easily, it's one of the fastest selling and one of the most beloved titles in the PlayStation family. And look, I'm not the biggest comic book guy. I don't follow all of the origin stories. I know of Marvel, I know of Spider-Man, X-Men, all of that. And on the DC side, I know of Batman and Joker and all of that. So I can't speak to all of the lore, but you know about the origin stories and mostly all of you of Spider-Man and all of that. But I want to mention this. So I'm 33 years old, born in 1987. So if you're born in the early 80s or late 80s, early 90s, you know of superhero mistreatment. And yes, if you follow James Wolfe, the angry video game nerd on YouTube, you know about all of those games in there. LJN. As soon as you got a movie license from LJN, a superhero license, whether it would be Spider-Man or X-Men, you know it was, shit down the toilet there. Jaws, any of those things. Any movie license, it was all garbage. So, on the other instance, if it wasn't LJN, and if you were Batman, you had games made by Sunsoft, you had incredible music, action platformers, Batman always had the best treatment. So, LJN, as we talked about, destroyed all of those likenesses that you want from those superheroes. And I always tended to think, especially from those dark days, that those games were kind of overrated as far as anything with the superhero license. And I'm very happy to say that Spider-Man PS4 and the Remastered and Miles Morales, that changes all the narratives. But let me continue here. So Maximum Carnage on the Super Nintendo, Spider-Man and Venom, that was a diamond in the rough for LJN because they brought it back in and they said, we're just going to make a fighting game and see if people like it. But that didn't end there. When Acclaim picked up Batman Forever, when you had Batman and Robin on the PS1, I mean, hell, even the recent, Spider-Man 3 on PSP and some of the PS2 games are pretty damn poor. And I know there was some PS1 games mixed in there with Spider-Man, but I only really played the demos of that. I can't speak on those too much. So, here we go. So, you know about the Batman games and Arkham Asylum and all of that. So, until Warner Brothers and Rocksteady made Batman Arkham Asylum on the 360 and PS3, that provided some hope finally, and that was a big seller, 2 million copies. So when you think about Spider-Man in the sense of 20 million copies, it's pretty crazy. And I think the Batman game, honestly, for the first time, especially people around my age group and all of that, that finally gave some people hope in terms of the genre. Okay, we're going to have this license, but we're not going to completely shit all over it. When you're thinking about Superman 64 on the Nintendo 64, I mean, that is a fucking death sentence as far as any of these games are concerned. And you can understand why, if you're in that age group, this isn't something that you want to think about playing and all of that. So, again, I'm going to talk about the graphics and gameplay and everything else per usual. But between Spider-Man Remastered and Miles Morales, what really struck me, and from what Insomniac was trying to do, and I think they really did an incredible job on this, was the subtle differences between Peter Parker and Miles Morales themselves. So you know about Peter Parker and Miles. They both have sense of justice and goodwill, and they're good people, but their styles are fundamentally different. Peter's the jokester that has all the quick quips, and he has an incredible, brilliant mind. And Miles is the same as far as having a brilliant mind, but he's always like an insecure high school student. He's just trying to get into that role of Spider-Man. He doesn't know where he fits in, feels a little bit uncomfortable on here and there, but he really does connect with the beat of the city. He connects with his family. He cares about all that stuff. And the coolest thing, and it's a really subtle thing, but when you go from Spider-Man PS4 or Remastered into Miles Morales, however you do it, however you choose to play it, you can really tell, even when you're web slinging in the air, between Peter and Miles, they all have their different flair and opportunities and moves to them, and I really think it's cool. And also, what's really interesting is when Spider-Man PS4 2018, this is just before COVID, just before the pandemic, and you get some hints into that story as far as some of that is concerned. And also, you know about all the movements and stuff that we have out here with Black Lives Matter and everything else like that. Miles Morales does have a little bit of that in this game, but the way that it chooses to handle it, the way Insomniac chooses to handle that, is the interconnectivity between Miles and Brooklyn and music and all of that, and having someone that goes in there that's a superhero that saves everything. It means something to them. And like me, in the sense of I grew up in Detroit and all of that. And look, I know I'm just a white kid with cerebral palsy, but I want to get to this point. When you think about the Flint water crisis and all that stuff that was going on here with Governor Rick Snyder and all of that, it kind of makes me think about, okay, you have some superhero coming in and try to fix all this stuff up, whether it be a fictional Brooklyn in that regard, or if someone that's in the Detroit or the Flint area, if someone goes in there and actually cares about them, and treats people like family and everything else, and we all just try to be better for ourselves, I think it's a very positive message. And I think that that's something Insomniac also wants to put in there, because not only does Miles have his own flair, and I know Peter's got a lot of the stuff in the love and the wanting to save the city and doing all that, but Miles, in the sense of the way it's interconnectivity and woven in with his family, culture, music, and all of that, is honestly a beautiful story all told. Not to mention there is a pretty cool sequence here with doing sign language with one of the girls in here after he gets his new costumes and all of that. So I really do like that. So the combat system, if you ever played Batman Arkham Asylum, you have a bunch of different combos, the things that you can do in air, a lot of different things you can do with Batman. Now on Spider-Man, in the sense of the web slinging, you can knock the guys in the air as you see, you can do combos, you can jump in off the wall, you can web sling to objects using the L2, R2. You can go down there and you can do some takeout moves. You can do some perch moves where you get them stuck on the ceiling. It's incredible. The combat system is completely fluid. And the one thing I would say as far as Spider-Man PS4 and going into Miles Morales is, I mentioned to everybody, I'm going to mention this again, you really have to play Spider-Man PS4 Remastered before you even touch Miles Morales, because the two stories between Peter and Miles and everything else is beautifully woven. So if you're playing Miles Morales first before you even play Spider-Man PS4, you're doing yourself a disservice. That's not the way that it goes, and you don't want to do that. So you want to make sure that you play Spider-Man first. So the combat and everything else, like I said, is a complete joy. But here's the subtle differences going in from PS4 to PS5. You saw it in the very beginning of these loading sequences and all of that. So instead of, if you quick travel, if you're Peter or you're Miles or you use the subway station, it's about 35-40 seconds on PS4. It's down to pretty much instantaneously using the subway about a half a second. If you're doing a cold boot on PS5, I can't speak of the PS4 times because I don't have that anymore there, but if you're doing a cold boot from PS5, it's about 7 seconds before you even get into the gameplay in the menu, instead of like, a minute and a half or something like that. So Insomniac really did their due diligence as far as getting this game to load as perfectly as possible, and have all the things look beautiful, and not to mention, as I talked about this before, if you played Spider-Man Remastered, you got this stuff day one, there was a nasty glitch in there, especially if you hadn't played Spider-Man on PS4, you'd be itching to play that one first. Insomniac has done all the patches, so if your PS5 went into sleep mode, it wouldn't delete your save files and all that stuff anymore. All that stuff's been done, and if you haven't gotten a chance to play this stuff yet, and you have a PS5, I don't know what you're waiting for, because this is pretty much the best launch game that you can get on the console. Already packaged in with Astro's Playroom, as I said. I think Astro's Playroom and Spider-Man, you want to get the Ultimate Edition so you can play Remastered and Miles Morales. The two best games right now that you can get on the PS5, bar none. So, all the stuff has been patched. They added a 60 frames per second ray tracing mode, so you can see now on the new hardware how the light bounces off the walls and things like that. The only thing downside is you might have a couple small frame drops, especially if you're playing on 4K. I'm still rocking 1080p myself, so obviously I didn't notice any of that stuff. But if you do play on that mode, you will notice there will be less pedestrians out on the streets when you're slinging around and all of that. So just be warned. I do want to play on the performance mode. That's what I did. I just went the performance mode straight way through where there's no frame drops, and the game never leaves 60 frames per second. And it's absolutely fucking gorgeous. And the combat is completely succinct. So where Peter has had more gadgets as far as the spider bot and some of the bombs and all of that stuff, Miles portrays it a little bit with Venom power. So it's nice when you get those punches, when you get the fast movements. And look, like I said, Spider-Man does throw a lot at you at the very beginning of the game as far as all the controls, but if you give it an hour, you'll be web-slinging all over the city with no problems whatsoever. It's absolutely freaking breathtaking to have that amount of freedom and that beautiful pacing and everything else. Because where Spider-Man was a little long, as far as like 40, 50 hours, I would think Miles Morales is maybe like 10 hours, because it cuts all the fluff and the bullshit. There's not so many extra things that are unneeded. That was probably one of those small criticisms that I have of Spider-Man. Miles Morales just takes it to the next level and gives you everything you want without taking out all the other stuff you didn't need. And I want to talk about this too. If you've heard some familiar voice actors where it's Yuri Lowenthal from Spider-Man or Yosuke in Persona 4, Tara Platt, his wife, who played Yuri Watanabe in Spider-Man, played Mitsuru in Persona 3. Laura Bailey, who's MJ, played Rise in Persona 4. Erica Lindbeck, honestly, I'd give her a hug and a kiss if I could. Black Cat, Futaba, Persona 5, Jessie, Final Fantasy VII Remake. The voice acting is absolutely fucking phenomenal. And like I said, we've come to those days where everything else is top-notch, top point. Insomniac destroyed it here with Spider-Man Remastered and Miles Morales. If I'm going to give this stuff a score, and yes, I'm going to tell you that it is completely boosted with the PlayStation 5, and this is how you should play it. But if you want to play it on PS4, do it now if you got one, but then move to PS5 and play it again. Absolute slam dunk 9 out of 10. I can't go any lower than that. Some of the PS5 niceties blow me away. Thank God for an SSD. Insomniac, great job. Peace out.